Well, two other people that we asked to come tonight, very grateful to have them on, is Evan King and Nathan Gravlin. They're wildlife biologists for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're very grateful that they're here tonight to help share their knowledge. They've had a lot of years of experience, not just in professionally as biologists, but also as hunters. Eric, do you want to do a quick survey for those who are new to bear hunting, or if you've hunted bear before? Could you throw that survey up?
You got it.
All right, so quick survey. Have you hunted bear in California before? Just curious.
Okay, we're getting polls in.
Yeah.
Looks like more than half of people have hunted bears before, but most of those who have were not successful. And then about 40% haven't hunted bears yet. So alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and close that one out. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much. It seems like there was a lot of interest that we had from new hunters as well as people who have tried it maybe once, just bought a bear tag with their deer tag. But it was good to see some interest out there for people wanting to try it out for the first time. So Nathan and Evan, could you maybe talk about I guess, really just basic bear? What's their life cycle like, especially throughout the year? Could you just give us a sense of, what's the life of a bear like, and, how do we come in contact with them throughout the year?
Yeah, I could start with a little bit about that. In the simplest terms, the bears do two things. One is reproduce, and the other is follow their stomach. They're driven.
Like people then.
Yeah, and the majority of the time of the year, they're following their nose, and that's what they do. So, as most people know, they're probably they know that bears eat just about anything. They're opportunistic. They do have a certain amount of protein in their diet, but most of the time it's nuts and soft crops like grasses, insects, ants. They'll definitely capitalize if they can on some protein when they get their chance, either roadkill or maybe running down a fawn or a deer. So, and now with the human population expanding, bears tend to get into a lot of trash, and that's another food source for them. And they do capitalize on that, which causes a lot of problems for people and for the bears themselves. But basically, they're going to follow the food availability throughout the year. They're probably starting out in the springtime with a lot of insects and a lot of vegetation, and then towards the fall, they'll probably move towards the hardmast and pinyon pines, acorns, any sort of the higher density foods that they get. Towards, I would say, maybe September, October, November, they're going to go in this hyperphagia phase where they are going to be putting on as much weight as possible for the winter. That's their time to build up as much fat reserve as possible. So they're going to be consuming anywhere, around 20,000 calories in one day.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're just going to be plowing through food and, drinking gallons of water. And their goal at this time, they're going to be doing a lot of resting and then just a lot of gaining weight and as much fat as possible. This is just to get them through the winter, where they'll den up, and the males will lose up to 15 to 30% of their body weight over the course of the winter, when they take their metabolism and almost go and cut it in half, lower their body temperature, and they go into that resting stage during the winter, relying on these fat sources that they've gained during the fall. A sow that's pregnant could lose up to about 40% of her weight. So as a hunter, you thinking about what they're eating at that time of the year that you're pursuing them is going to help out a lot on capitalizing where you should be hunting. I've definitely, when speaking with hunters, they'll tell me that the bears have moved down. They're all on acorns, and we'll see a lot of that later in the fall. And it also depends on the acorn years. In California, on this side, on the east side of the Sierras, they're probably hitting up a lot of the pinyon pines and that type of stuff. So, I mean, there's so much fun facts about bears. They're really interesting animals. They have this delayed implantation reproductively that's amazing. They get bred in May to June, but they don't have their babies until about January, February. What happens is they're really relying on this food source in the fall to get fat. The females are, because the egg will get fertilized but won't implant until it has enough food availability, the storage in its body. And then when it goes into that dormant period, then the baby basically gets born and then relies on the mom during that time of the year. Yeah.
So is the egg actually fertilized then in May, June, and is just
For mine, yeah.
egg growth, or
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So it doesn't get implanted until the body tells it that there's enough food available, or fat storage. And so some years, if there's not enough, they just simply won't have that baby. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now,
So
what age do they I guess, what's the breeding age for males and females?
I'm not quite sure on males, probably a little bit younger than females, but generally about 4 years old, 4.5 years old. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And a bear can easily live to about 25 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. And they typically don't have young every year. It's about every other year, because it's pretty taxing, and they're also they're caring for their young for about that long.
Interesting.
Yeah. Another thing to consider is that they have probably one of the best abilities to smell out of any mammal, and bears in general. I think the polar bears are said to have a little bit wider range, probably because of their habitat that they live in, where they have a lot longer fetches of wind to cover, so they can catch smells better. But whereas a bear, in the Sierras can probably easily smell, up to a mile or more. Yeah.
So should I be opening up a bag of corn chips while I'm hunting?
Yeah.
That comes along.
Yeah, I was reading an article once that like the density of bears, like in Yellowstone, right? It's like at any point you're probably standing in the woods, a bear can smell you. So yeah. So consider that when you're out there. But yeah, they have a very, very heightened ability to smell. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, you were telling me before once about how there's some geographic differences with bears in California, how like the Southern California bears may or may not hibernate. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I don't it's probably more anecdotal than actual hard science with the studies, because we haven't done studies on every segment of the population. But I deal with bear problems year round almost, and in the Southern Sierras and where I'm working mainly, there tends to be enough food available all year round. We don't get a heavy winter, so bears probably drop down lower. They get into acorns, and then you get some green up in January and February. They probably don't go into a full resting period like you do up in Northern California, the Modoc, the Tahoe bears, things like that, where they're really relying on the fact that there's no food available year round. And so I think there's a lot more movement to bears year round than we expect in certain spots.
And two, I mean, speaking of movement, I even remember there's some bears that came down here to Fresno near Woodward Park at one point. Do they follow a seasonal migration on the Western Sierras here the way they do, like the deer do? Or is it kind of different, or is it just depending on the year?
Yeah, I think it's probably dependent on the food. You probably have young bears too that are trying to find their spot out there. They may move around. One of the studies I think that was going on, and Nathan may touch into this, on the mono Inyo County area. You know, a sow with cubs are talking about 20 square miles of a home range. I'm sure there'll be a bigger for a male that's trying to find a mate or food sources. I think it's primarily dictated on food. What they're going to be doing is moving around until they find a food source that's available.
Okay.
But I do know that a few, you know, bears that we have darted and relocated at times, problem bears, no harm, no foul type situation, they've moved quite a distance.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool. So with I know other game animals, we've had sort of this issue of, you know, populations kind of crashing about 100 years ago and kind of recovering from there and having some declines as well. What is the a very similar model that bears have followed, like the way deer populations have in California, or is it totally different with them?
Yeah, I think the general trend that we've been seeing is an increase over the years, the population. And deer tend to rely on early cereal stage habitat, and I think the bears being more opportunistic, they've just increased over time. And I wouldn't be surprised if increasing in population due to availability from humans, food sources from humans, might benefit them as well. You know, they get into trash and cat food and whatnot. It just seems to be increasing and not as much hunter pressure. You know, they don't seem to be susceptible to the change in the forest that we've seen. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's estimated about 30,000 bears in the state right now.
Wow. And how many tags are issued every year? I forget.
So I have actually have that data here. 2019, we sold looks like just under 28,000 tags, and last year was just over 30,000 tags.
Wow. But only 900 were actually taken.
Yeah. Total last year looks like successful report was 1,024.
1,024. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I have here. About
Is that average, or is
307.
that down
I would say that's down.
due to fires, or I mean, any guesses on
Probably-
what that might have been?
Probably any number of things. I do think that bear hunting without dogs probably decreases success rate. I think a lot of hunters are more using it as opportunistic when they're out there deer hunting, and they find a bear. You know, that hound hunting, you know, that they were pretty hardcore hunters, you know, and without that, I think the hunting population, you know, going after bears has dropped a little bit, and being successful. And so I know that this year probably fires had a large amount to do with it. You know, when that bear season opens up with deer season, and a lot of those deer seasons were closed down due to fires, I think that had a big impact as well, for sure.
Yeah. So how do you guys go about tracking populations to know, like, how do we know there's 30,000 bears? What kind of studies are you guys working on these days? And what do you guys do? What does Fish and Game do?
Yeah, great question. Nathan, did you want to touch bases on that one?
Sure. Yeah, I'll chime in on that. You know, so historically, our primary method was tooth, aging, and sex from harvest. So, you know, when you harvest a bear, you're required to submit that head to Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we pull a tooth from it. And from that tooth, we get an age. And then with the age and the sex ratios, we're able to get a rough estimate of the bear population. So 30,000 is a pretty rough estimate. Currently, we're working on a few different studies around the state. We got one going over out of the Bishop office. There's one up in Modoc County, another one in the North Bay area, and then one down in SoCal in Riverside County. And what we're trying to do with those is actually get a bear density. So you don't necessarily get, you know, a real precise population estimate, but you do get a density per habitat type. The way they're doing that is kind of twofold. So they're collecting hair samples using a snare setup, and it varies depending on who's doing it, but kind of one of the most effective methods is you take a bait like a roadkill deer, put it in a bunch of trees, and you wrap around those trees barbed wire, and then as the bears climb through that, they leave a little bit of hair, and we pull that, and they can extract the DNA. So that DNA, in combination with GPS collars from trapped bears, gives us a number of bears in an area and then a home range for those bears. And so they take that combination and we can get a density. That's the real basic model.
Interesting. Now, I've heard of some similar stuff being done right now in like I think San Luis Obispo County, or maybe it was a few years ago, because there they don't have any bear hunting. But is that kind of how they're trying to figure out when it's okay to open it up, is using the barbed wire?
Yep. And actually so the study up in Modoc, I didn't realize until I was talking to the lead for that study that Modoc County is not in the bear hunting zone. I mentally had thought everything north, was bear, you could hunt bears. And so several years ago, he approached the wildlife branch and headquarters. They're the ones that sort of manage or decide whether we're going to pursue a regulation change. And he wanted to add that area to the bear zone. And they said, well, where's your data? And he's like, I don't have any data. And so he's collecting that data right now. And I've actually got some pictures if I can share them with you guys.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, let's see here. So let's open that up. This is the biggest one that they got on camera. And that bear, so you can see that there's actually the back of the trap there. That bear was big enough to reach up inside the trap, grab the bait and pull it out without getting himself caught.
Oh, man.
And they estimated he was well over 450 pounds.
We're just seeing thumbnails on our side.
It may take a second for it to come through here.
Okay. 450
screen sharing.
bear.
Did it come through yet?
No, we're just looking at your file.
Nathan, if there's an option to share desktop rather than just sharing a particular screen, that's what you're going to want to try to click on.
Let me get out of stop share. Let's see here. Share. That's pushing my technological skills. It has advanced sharing options. Let's see here. Let me try it one more time. Let me try this one more time.
Okay.
Is it popping up now?
Hey,
Much better.
there we go.
There it is.
Okay.
Man, what a tank.
So that's the big one. But so basically in their study, they're in the Warner Mountains. It's not a very large mountain range. It's similar to the mountain ranges you'd see in Nevada. They're long and narrow, not a lot of great bear habitat. But just from what they've collected, which is not all the bears up there, they've identified 97 different individuals in that one small mountain range.
Wow.
And as you can see, they're really healthy. He said they had 4 bears that they actually captured. This one they never did get because he wouldn't go all the way in the trap. But 4 of the bears were over 400 pounds. And so, you can see that there's clearly a healthy population up there. And so that's kind of the basics of what we're doing in terms of trying to estimate bear populations and densities. Wildlife management is challenging, especially in a state like California, where you've got so many different habitat types. In the western slope of the Sierras, if anybody's hunted there or lives there, you know how hard it is to see deer, let alone a bear. When you can't see wildlife, it makes it really hard for us to count them. So we use these other methods to either collect DNA samples, whether it's hair or scat, some form of capture, usually whether it's trapping or darting, and then a combination of those with collars and ranges. And so some of the interesting things that we're picking up, this was done primarily, all these studies are being done to get a better estimate of the bear population size. But through that, we're learning more about their actual habits. The study over in Inyo County, or I guess it was actually in Mono where this took place, they had one sow that they captured on Slinkard Wildlife Area. She made her way all the way over to Arnold, which is off of Highway 4. It's 40 or 50 miles probably. And then she ended up back, and they recaptured her in the same location. We don't exactly know why she went over to Arnold, but she did. Other bears in that study have followed the pinyon pine harvest. And so they'll, however they know, we're not sure how they know when to go after those pinions, but they may take exploratory little trips. And if they get good pinyon pine nuts, they'll continue. And then we have kind of a similar thing with acorns. This last year we had a really, really good acorn crop in the blue oaks. And a lot of bears came down, fed in those blue oaks, and as soon as they kind of fed it off, they moved back up to the higher elevations. And so several bears were taken at really low elevations this last year because they were down in those oaks. So that's just a little bit of what we're working on, and it's a challenge, in the state to manage a population that's so varied, and we have so many different interests from people, and all those other things that play into what we do, and so that's kind of where we're at.
Cool. I'll say for people who are on the call tonight, we'll try to hold some of the questions to the end, but I did see one that came up, and it's just rather timely. Are there things that hunters can do while we're out in the field to help report sightings? I mean, would any of that help with data collection, or is that just too likely that we're seeing the same bear by 10 people, not 10 bears? Is there anything that hunters can do while we're out in the field to kind of help you guys keep better data?
If you're in an area that would be considered probably not prime bear habitat and you run across bears, that would definitely be of interest to us. We know that the bears are out there, and we know that we have a relatively healthy population in most places. But it's actually figuring out the science, how do you do that statistical modeling to come up with a defendable, number? Because if we get taken to court, which is one of the other options, you mentioned the Senate bill, getting sued over a lack of data is another possibility. And
wow.
And so our data has to be defendable, in a court setting. And that's up to our statisticians to help us figure out how to do that. And so these methods that we're using right now are very they're proven methods that other states are using.
Interesting. You guys, it really sounds like you guys have a lot of pressure on you to come up with data in a really difficult environment.
Yep. Yes, I would agree with that. we're Evan and I are the project we're working on right now is trying to capture deer in the Tehachapi area, and it's the same thing. We need good science behind our population estimates, and it's a challenge from every side of it.
Wow. Now, I know there's some things like I think my kids found eye tracker or something like that, where people were trying, like, just citizen science, they're typing in any location. I mean, do those things help you? Are you guys using any of that at all, or is that just not professionally up to par with what you guys need to defend what you do?
With more sensitive species, that helps, but with a population like bears, where we know there's a lot of bears, that just kind of it gets lost with all that other data.
Okay. So yeah, I think on Fish and Wildlife, you guys had something like that with porcupines, where they're asking people to report any sign of or evidence of porcupine at all.
Yeah.
It's usually a species that we're struggling. We don't, either there's some interest, we just don't know that much about it, or it's, we have a lot of other things we're working on, and people can help us, start to piece together those data sets. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So let's say I'm totally green on bear hunting, and I'd say I'm just maybe a darker shade of green. I've taken one bear ever, and I've only got two successive years of tags that I've even bothered to purchase. How would I go about finding a bear? to even, maybe attempt a stalk? Like, how do I get myself in a bear area and find one?
I think focusing on the food, bear sign, if bears are in the area, their sign is not hard to find, right? They're not that secretive. And so looking for areas where depending on your time of year, if you're archery hunting, into berries, if you're up in the high country, you might be into elderberries or some sort of currant. Looking for a food source is going to be your first, the first step. And then I think from that point, how you actually hunt bears is a whole nother story. I mean, that depends on your topography, the type of forest, your open country you're in. But one thing that I've heard from a lot of bear hunters that I've talked to, or prospective bear hunters, guys that are trying, is they'll call and say, well, I covered 12 miles today and I didn't see a single bear. It's probably because you're moving too fast. Bears, it's not like they're going to pop out on a hillside like a group of deer. They may, but there's a better chance that they're in the brush eating. And unless you're still and you glass a lot, you're probably not going to see them.
Mhm. Yeah, anytime I've seen them in the Western Sierras, it's always, you can't really see that far usually. So it's usually just somewhere by water, because they're getting a drink. It's usually warm, summertime or archery season. The gooseberries, you mentioned currant, but gooseberries that are spiny, do they eat those? Can their tongue take that?
Yeah. Yeah. You'll find the bears will get into some pretty thick, spiny, the gooseberries and currants and stuff like that. You're not going to want to go in there as a hunter, but they'll go up in there and sit and just eat. It is challenging.
Out those hillsides of thimbleberry, when those come up, you see nice, thimbleberry patch. Worth staking out those for a while.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing I would say is the same goes for deer hunting too, but thinking about the time of day and your exposure, bears have that thick coat, and if they're a fat bear, they've got all that fat holding in the heat, and they like to get in a cool spot in the middle of the day. So just consider the time of day, your aspect, the elevation, all those sorts of things. And like Evan said, the time of year, the awesome thing about bear hunting is you're not restricted to deer hunting. You can hunt into November and December, and those are fantastic times to be out in the woods. It's cooler, and it just gives you a lot more opportunity. But temperature, especially in the early season, can play a big role in where you might find them.
Is it worth, I guess, staying out and just hunting exclusively for bear, or is it so challenging that you just kind of want to stick to the deer season and just hope you might encounter one?
I think you could I think it's like Nathan said, going out in November and stuff. There's quail season, and you could probably hone in on their food source a little bit better. As far as take goes, I think both opportunistic and pursuing them directly is beneficial to the population, and as keeping the numbers, the take numbers up. But yeah, I would say to go after them, go hone in on where they're at, take that challenge and try to really pay attention to what's going on out there. Be really cognitive of the wind too, because they are able to smell really well. But why not go out there and walk around in the woods a little bit, and if you find old dry scat that's probably full of grass, that's probably from this, earlier in the year. If you find scat that has berries in it, you might be, it's fresher, start thinking about, all right, they're probably on the berries, or if they're got a bunch of acorns in their scat. We've all seen bear scat out there, and you could definitely tell at different times of the year what they're eating.
Cool. All right. Eric, can we launch a survey question about whether or not people plan to buy bear tag this year?
Absolutely. Let's take a look and see what people think.
Yeah, Are you planning on buying a bear tag this year? Yes or no? Good. Lots of people wanting to try it out. It's good to see.
We got some enthusiastic bear hunters here. So let's see. Okay, just give another second or two, and then we will end the poll, and I'll share that with y'all. And then I got two quick questions that I'll just have asked. One, can you reiterate the name of berry species that people should research to recognize what those plants look like? So when they're trying to figure out finding food sources for bears.
So currants, elderberries, snowberry,
Manzanita.
oh, chokecherry, manzanita. Yeah.
You like the chokecherry too, huh?
Oh yeah, they'll chow down on chokecherries.
I tried one once. It wasn't very good.
No, but they'll also, and then of course, if you're out doing other hunting, deer hunting or whatever, and you notice that the trees are loaded with acorns, just keep that in mind. And then they start dropping, the bears will show up eventually. And the same would go if you're hunting on the east side and, there's a good crop of pinyon pine, the bears may very well end up in those pine trees. That was another thought I had. It's so hard to get drawn for a lot of our X zones. But with the bear tag, you can hunt a lot of those zones, on an annual basis if you wanted to. You could do your scouting for your deer hunt, in the future, or just spend a lot of, great time on the east side because it's just such a cool area to be. Every time I've had the next 12 tag, I've seen a bear and I didn't have a bear tag with me. So I regret it.
I think, Evan, you might have mentioned that before. And for some reason, it just never occurred to me that, it seems like a brilliant idea that you could really get to know those limited draw zones so much better by going there every year and bear hunting. And then when you finally do get drawn, then the area, what might be around at that time of year, at least the terrain, how to hunt it so much better than if you're going in completely fresh.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that when we were talking to the guys on the east side of Inyo Mono, they have a very high density of bears and not many hunters that are pursuing them. And maybe it's the steepness of the terrain, or just, I think in general, a lot of hunters don't think that that's bear habitat. And so if you want to find the perfect bear habitat, there's probably not one. They are really opportunistic and they're really adaptable, and they're going to be in dry, arid environments to really wet forests. They're across the landscape pretty well. Yeah, they're really good at adapting.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
Changing gears a little bit, would you guys say that bears are dangerous game? Like, are these like grizzly bears? Do we need to be packing a sidearm if we're out? Are they kind of lurking around every corner? I know some people get really freaked out about bears, but you guys deal with them and have way more exposure than any recreational hunter. So tell us about safety protocols when dealing with bears.
Yeah, out of all the bear species, the black bear is one of the most docile, if you call a bear docile. They're the most mild-mannered bear. They're not the grizzlies. They don't tend to attack and come after people. Attacks to humans are very rare. The majority of the encounters that I've heard over the years with bears and humans have nothing to do with hunters as much as they do with backpackers and not securing their food. I hiked the Pacific Coast Trail and slept with food, and also you hang your food correctly if you're in a high bear area. The reason why these bears are causing problems in parks and stuff is because there's a high density of backpackers, and then the bears learn from that. But as far as hunting goes, I personally have never been, fearful of a bear. And typically you have a weapon in your hand. And so whether it be in archery or rifle. And so, yeah, they're generally a lot more afraid of us. And I've had some very close encounter with bears in, problem wildlife scenarios. And Not necessarily been afraid of them. I don't necessarily want one on the end of a catch pole, but for the most part, they're not interested in attacking.
Are there any warning signs that they might, like, we might be getting too close to them if you're just encountering them out in the wild, whether or not, you know, they're injured? I've heard some people talk about them clapping their jaws, if they're feeling a little more defensive, bluff charges.
Sure.
Right? Is that
Yeah.
stuff even really happen that often?
Yeah, absolutely. And a sow with cubs, you know, like any, you know, mama bear, you don't want to get involved with the moose, you know, and they're young, any animal and they're young, that's going to cause some issues, you know, and you definitely don't want to be in between them. So if you think about a bear's anatomy, you know, they don't have a large tail or anything like that. They're going to use their mouth and their body language as posturing and communication. So yeah, those bluff charges, the breathing heavy and snapping at you. I've seen that when they're, you know, in enclosures, and I think that's their communication. But again, it's you know, those bluff charges are not really, if they wanted to attack you, they could, you know, immediately. It's not their number one goal. But you know, they're powerful animals. You should be cautious too. You know, I'm not saying go out there and try to pet a bear by any means, but you know, they're out there. They're more afraid of you though.
Be
Yeah,
cautious.
I'd say a non-lethal shot, you know, wounded bear is probably your biggest concern. And making sure you good shot placement.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, let's say quickly, you know, my experience with bear, as I said before, is pretty limited, but just as a quick story, it was last season or 2 seasons ago, my neighbor taking me out and showed me a little bit of the bear sign in the area. There are things that he showed me I just had no idea were even bear sign. You know, there was a tore up log, which I figured, my eyes just glanced right over. I never even saw it before, but come to find out, it was bears tearing up the wasp nest in there to get at some of the brood. He was telling me. We found some ground nests tore up in the area as well. And yeah, long story short, at the end of my deer hunting last year, just so happens I had a bear tag on me, and a bear walks up at about 15 yards. So took the shot, got the bear, but yeah, it all happened so fast. It was just kind of an opportunistic kill. Does that tend to be how most deer or most bears are taken in California? Are they more opportunistic, or are people like looking for them specifically?
Yeah, these days it's mostly opportunistic. When hound hunting was allowed, you know, that was a big sport, and a lot of bears were taken with hounds. You know, going back to Evan's talk, we have not reached our quota since hound hunting was made illegal. So the maximum number of bears that can be killed in a year hasn't been reached since then. You know, in the last, you know, couple of years, it's dropped even farther, and maybe some of that's fire. And, you know, I'm sure some of it's fire, right? It's got to be, because just access. But I do think it's because that more serious bear hunter that's really pursuing bears just isn't as common as it used to be.
Could that be almost like a democratizing effect of the ban on hunting with hounds? That now it's opened up to more people because there's a lot more bears, and you don't need a pack of hounds to go hunt them anymore. Or is it going to kind of limit take for a long time?
That's a good question. I don't know. I do think that, you know, hound hunting is the most effective way, right? So people are more successful that way. The bear population, I believe, was still robust and probably increasing even when we were harvesting the full quota. But yeah, I mean, certainly I do think more bears are easily accessible because they're not getting chased, which not even necessarily the harvest, but that experience where, you know, you've got a houndsman on a road and a dog gets a scent and that bear gets chased off that road. When that's happening constantly throughout a season, it's going to make it a lot harder for the guys that don't have dogs to get a bear. And we're seeing it with our problem bears, where they're just not as afraid of people as they used to be. We don't have any hard evidence. We have a lot of experience.
Mhm.
And, people have dogs out and the bears just don't care. They come right past them.
So it could be that there's never a better time to have a bear tag.
Right. Yeah,
Try to look on the bright side here,
that's right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll move on just to a quick segment, just for new bear hunters. If you haven't dealt with a bear before, once you have a bear on the ground, I'll just cover it really quickly and just say that the Colorado Parks and Recreation has a very good video series on what to do with the bear. How do you skin it? I called up Kurt Santoro, who's kind of a local taxidermist in the area with Lifelike Taxidermy. And his whole thing was just make sure you're making straight, even cuts. He said you wouldn't believe what you get sometimes. It looks like somebody took a chainsaw and opened up the bear. But his main recommendation was just straight, even cuts. Very much treat it like a deer, with the exception of leave the hide attached to the skull if you're planning on doing anything with the taxidermy, and of course leave the paws inside. So if you plan on mounting the bear, that was his recommendation. Just keep it even, keep the paw inside there, keep the head attached. And then one piece of advice that I got kind of after the fact was to make sure to try to prop the mouth open if you can, so that the biologist can pull their tooth and it's not a big hassle. They don't have to get there and pry it open with a pry bar or something. The mouth is already open, makes for an easy extraction. But on to cooking. Jason, if you can chime in here. Let's say we got a bear, it's back home. We've got it, maybe cut up in pieces. What are some good recipes and how do you recommend treating it?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Matt. Unfortunately, I was hoping to get bear. I know some of you know this. I tried everything to get some bear at this time of year. It was tough. I started putting together a recipe for a stew, right? I figured this time of year it would be, fantastic. And it also kind of addresses, trichinosis is an issue. So you want to make sure you get the meat to the proper temperature, which, by the way, I Googled this today for the first time ever. The trichinella is actually killed at 137 degrees, which your meat would be medium rare. Interestingly enough, most recommendations are around 160 degrees. I even saw some at 170. So at that point, you've got likely a large roast, you've got a large muscle mass. You're going to want to be cooking it longer, right? Anyway, just to get the toughness out. So I thought stew would be great. I had taken it so far is to even try and source some ingredients that would be similar to what the bear is eating, right? And include that into the stew. And then additionally with the fat, I was hoping to do some jalapeno cheddar drop biscuits, right? With some of the bear fat. Didn't work out, so I don't have anything specific to share, but I do know from the poll, which was fantastic, by the way, we've got a lot of experienced hunters on the line, as well as board members. So you guys, how to cook game meat and so on. I think I'd address some of the new folks and simply say this: never be intimidated by your harvest, right? I've been fortunate enough where probably 100% of the case where I've tasted and known what a specific game tastes like before I've actually hunted it, harvested it. It's not always the case. You may want, I said with the other poll, a lot of folks are going to likely go bear hunting and they may have never tasted bear. It's certainly their first bear hunt. And I would just simply say this, that protein's protein, meat is meat. So if you're wondering what to do next, like what to cook, I would say go for your favorite meal, go for your favorite recipe and simply substitute the bear meat. One of the things it was Fish and Wildlife does some awesome advanced hunter courses. So I recommend that. Just a quick plug. They're fantastic. I learned a lot of tricks over the years, and some of them came directly from the courses that Lieutenant Alan Gregory would teach. One of which is, if it's your first harvest and like Matt, you've taken this bear, and Matt, I don't know if you had bear prior to that, simply take your cast iron pan or a nonstick pan, whatever, a little salt and pepper, a little oil in the pan, and cook a small bit. It could be, just a cut of the roast, a cut of a tenderloin. It could even be the grind. The idea is you'll very quickly get an idea of what it tastes like, what it smells like, and then you can, adjust accordingly. I think I think you're going to talk about this later, so I won't go into great detail. Certainly you want to take care of your game. There's a number of things that influence how any game meat's going to taste, as we all know, right? So, what it's eating, the time of year, any hormones, it may be experiencing like deer in rut, that sort of thing. When you keep it clean, you keep it dry, you keep it cold, you're going to have the best shot on goal for a good recipe. So I would just say, kind of lean in, pick your favorite recipe and try that first. I've not tried bear grind and made it into a burger. A lot of stuff we normally do with deer and elk and other things is fortify it with some other fat, right? And everybody has kind of their own preference. Bear has fat, so it may be such that if you want to do something as simple as a hamburger with the bear meat, it'll hold together. I know I hunt many things, but I enjoy hunting axis deer. It's a great meat. The axis deer hunter purist will kill you if you fortify that meat with anything. But to get the burger to hold together, as an example, they'll use an egg. So they'll just use a raw egg instead of any kind of fat fortification. It'll still hold together. It'll survive the grill if you're cooking your burger off on the grill. Certainly survive the fry pan. So yeah, I don't have anything specific necessarily to share. I would just say for the new folks at least, just treat it like protein. If you need to do a quick taste test, do that. Back to within the context of taking care of the bear, wild game meat's wild game meat. It has a flavor, it has a taste. I've never liked the word gamey. If something's gamey, it's just like fish being fishy. Never should be that way. It's likely that you haven't taken care of it in the best possible manner. Again, I know there's other influences that can kind of damage the meat's flavor and taste. Try and stay away from the gamey. When you are cooking your meal, think about the recipe again that you enjoy, that you'd like to cook, but at the same time, you don't want to mask the taste of the wild game meat. I don't think any of us, that's just the whole point is to enjoy it. So do your best. You shouldn't be covering flavors or tastes or trying to do that, mask them. Just be sure that, go heavy with the spice, whatever you want to do in that case, but just don't do anything that masks the flavor. Definitely enjoy, what you've harvested, enjoy the flavor, and go with that. So hopefully that answers your question, Matt. I know from some of the field to table events and other things, I'd put together a quick website because folks were asking about various recipes. I know we competed at Randy back in 2019 and other stuff. So if there's any interest, you can ping us. I can send you that information. There's some recipes on the site. One in particular that I would love to try the bear meat with is a chili recipe that I've got up. And then secondarily, if you've got grind, I had done a sort of a Southwestern egg roll with elk, and I think bear meat would be fantastic with that. So just something for consideration.
JR, you have a question or something to add?
Yeah, I just thought I'd chime in. In terms of cooking bears, I like to do a lot of braise in bears. I don't necessarily go the steak route just because of trichinosis. That said, that 137 degree temperature is right. It takes 1 minute at 137. So with the advent of immersion circulators or sous vide, you can get there and you can actually cook medium rare if you want to do that. But just know your numbers on that, and as long as you can hold it at, if you held it at 140 for an hour and then pan seared it beyond that, you should be fine. But also bears in California, especially if they're finishing on acorns, absolutely delicious. We always get stories of, especially in the hunting community, they're like, oh, I couldn't eat it. It was too gamey or it was too tough or too this. I'm one of those that says, that I'm pretty confident in the kitchen that if meat is tough or gamey or whatever, it's almost always human error. It's at some level. And part of that could be environmental. Maybe it was too hot when you got it. But the amount of, I would say, fall feed for our bears, when they're feeding on berries and high caloric stuff, berries, pinyon on the Eastern Sierra, acorns in the Sierra and the Western Sierra, and up into Mendo in the North Zone. I mean, jamon serrano is one of the biggest delicacies of the world, which is basically, cured ham from Spain. It's all acorn finished because acorn is a terrific nutrient. So a lot of great bear recipes out there. Like I said, again, I like to braise. If you're in California, hopefully you've heard of Hank Shaw. If you haven't heard of Hank Shaw, write it down right now. He's got a lot of great bear recipes on his website. As well as anything related to hunting and fishing. He's got recipes from fish to big game to small game to to upland. He's got everything. So lots of good stuff out there when it comes to bear cooking. And also one of my favorite recipes I did is actually I did a honey. I used Hank's recipe. I did for Easter one year. I did a honey baked bear ham. So I cured it for a few days in a in a cure, and then basted it with honey as I smoked it in my big green egg, and it was so killer. It was probably one of the best hams that I've ever had.
Wow. Yeah, I would echo the sentiment about cleanliness and human error. I've had deer that sat overnight that didn't taste all that great. They're pretty gamey. Another one was gut shot before. That one was pretty gamey. But anything that I can get that I can harvest quickly, get it cooled quickly, and I can keep it clean, almost always it's very mild. It doesn't have any of that gaminess to it at all. When I went out with the bear tag, my wife actually told me, no, don't take a bear, don't come home with a bear. I did anyway. She's nice to me. But funny thing was, she didn't even want to eat the bear, and yet when we served burgers, even steaks, we just cooked it all the way through. She's a fan. No complaints. The plates were clean, wife and kids. Everybody ate the whole thing up. We just finished off that bear that I shot in August. It's done just as of a few weeks ago. We have none left. It's all gone. Good stuff. Any of the board members, any other questions you want to ask before we open it up to some other folks out there?
I don't know. I've been collecting a lot of questions, so we can.
Yeah, we got a lot of great questions. So
launch into that if Evan and Nathan are ready.
Yeah.
And
Let's
yeah,
do it.
great. Before I do that, I just want to get one more last poll of whether you all are members of BHA or not.
Oh, yes.
Just curious.
I like it. Yes, and not yet.
I stacked the deck a little bit there. All right, folks. Well, thank you for being a part of the organization. We got 70% of folks yes, and for the rest of you, we'd love to encourage you to get involved. We're a volunteer-focused organization, and there's a lot of things you can do to help public lands and wildlife and fish in the state. So
great.
Great.
Yeah. Do we want to open up questions from people, or do you want to just read off some of the questions that you guys have seen?
I've been collecting a bunch of the questions. So
great.
Let's see. If you want, I can just kind of start going through some of these ideas. Okay, let's start here. I'm going to start with some questions about habitat and feed and such. One is, besides water, what are some other needed features of habitat to be around we should be looking for? This one's specifically for SoCal, D11 and D13, so Angeles and Los Padres, before we bother making a sit for them. And then the follow-up was, I've heard that in drought years, they tend to raid birds' nests for eggs more. What kind of birds trees should a hunter be looking at in a dry, hot summer leading up to the fall? So if there's any advice on SoCal bear hunting, that would be helpful.
I would say definitely, if it's hot, you got to look for shade, and the water is important, but they need to be able to regulate their temperature, and they can only really do that by moving. So shade's going to be a big deal. As far as the bird nest goes, I have not heard that, but I do know that, bears are opportunistic, and if they find something and they're successful at it, oftentimes they can start to key in on that. They have kind of learned behaviors sometimes. We've got bears that, will key in on deer fawns, and, they know where to find them at that time of year, and they'll do that on a yearly basis. So it's not necessarily something that every bear is going to do in a drought year, but they're probably going to travel more in a drought year if food is scarce.
Great. That was actually, I think, a question I saw somewhere about what is a bear's total range, and can you sort of, is that generalized or is it very specific to the particular environment that the bear is in?
It's going to have a lot to do with the environment. The boars are going to have a larger range. So like with that east side study of the Bridgeport area, a lot of the home ranges, Evan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought they said they were in the 20 square kilometer-ish. But then you had these like large movements where they're going out to get pinyon pine, or they're going high up in the mountains to, for the green meadows early in summer. But then they had kind of this core range they centered on. So it's going to depend on, a lot of it's going to depend on food and bear densities. If there's a lot of bear in the area, they're going to probably have a smaller home range, like up in the B zones, a lot of bears up there. And so, if you've got a lot of feed and a lot of bears, they can make a living off of a small area.
Here's a question from a first-time bear hunter asking if bears like burns the way many ungulates do.
Yep.
Yeah,
They do.
absolutely.
Go ahead, Evan.
Oh yeah, I think that they're just like deer. They will enjoy the fresh new growth, and probably all the other animals that are involved in that area too. If you got lots of flowers and insects using it, you got burned logs with grubs in there, you got fresh grass growth. Yeah. They probably won't find the hard mass food source there, but all that new growth, sure.
And then looks like a follow-up question on that. Do bear ranges overlap? Are there multiple bears in a few square miles, or are they more like mountain lions where there's sort of set territory and they kind of stay away from each other?
They definitely overlap. There may be conflicts because of that, but yeah, we'll oftentimes see in an area where, like when you've got a really good acorn crop, you might see 3 or 4 bears in a very short distance, and that's well within one home range maybe, but they're in there and they're feeding, and as long as there's enough food to go around, they're not going to fight with each other too much. And then during the breeding season, there's going to be a lot of overlap, and the boars are going to be aggressive with each other and things like that.
I don't know how truthful it is. Again, that kind of goes back to the problem with counting bears. If you see one and one of them not, we have the same bear. But I had a friend that hunted a ranch this year, and he swears he saw over 20 different individuals, and during the time they were on the acorns, so maybe within a month period on that one particular ranch. So yeah, there's definitely at times a higher density, especially when they're all concentrating on that food source.
Regarding acorns, is there a preference? Do they like them when they're green and freshly dropped, or they just sort of, if there's acorns on the ground, even if they're dried out, will they eat them?
Nathan, do you know that one?
They key in on them when they're freshly dropping. I watched a bear this year actually rake acorns into his mouth in the tree. And so, and then those bears, for the most part in my area, they left as soon as that fresh acorn drop stopped. But my hunch is, they'll probably eat them if they find them and they're older. But when they're going sort of outside of their normal habits to get the acorns, I think is when they're really fresh.
So on, I would agree with that, because on an incident I had where a bear was causing damage to a house, it was going along the siding and pulling the siding where the acorns had been stashed because of the woodpeckers. And it would just open up the siding and all these acorns would fall down, and then open up the siding and acorns would fall down. So if the bird's stashing an acorn, then it's probably on a fresher side or a real viable one that doesn't have an insect in it. So yeah, I would probably think, and based on when we see the bears show up on acorns, they're like immediate, like when the acorn drop is happening.
And that's usually around fall,
September.
September,
Yeah.
October. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In arid environments, what do bears lean towards eating? I'm assuming more berries and things, but
They're probably going to key in more on the riparian areas where you've got, seeps and springs, creeks where you've got berries and willows and grasses along those edges. They don't.
Probably a large. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would say a large. I think that we discount how much insect, probably volumes of insects that they eat.
Yeah.
good high protein source
Yeah.
there. This isn't specific to any geography. We had a question about what elevation bears like in the fall, and I'm assuming that, again, depends on food and geography where they are, but maybe there's a few different areas you might be able to talk about in the state of where one might be looking for, would you look lower, would you look higher?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it does go back to that food. I noticed something this summer. I was in the backcountry at 9,000 foot elevation and found a giant pile of bear scat, and it was just full of dry. I mean, that bear had probably been living there for days, if not weeks, and it was just full of grass. But at no point during that time did I ever see any fresh scat. So I don't know that there's probably a home range that they have, but then they're going to go to these seasonal variations of food source for sure.
Yeah, I think the bears that they've collared on the east side have actually crossed over the Sierras. I mean, so they'll go, 10,000 feet without a problem. But that's tight, it's more like a spring movement where they're going up and they're following the green, the snow melt and the green up. But like Evan was saying this last fall, I hunted in a similar area and all of the bear scat was really old. It was from, probably early archery season and, late summer timeframe. And by the time rifle season rolled around, they were completely moved out of that country. And I mean, there was a lot of bear sign, but it was all old. And so, you just kind of have to work your way around to find different spots. If you're up in the, the pine and firs and you're just not seeing the sign that you think you should see, try to find an area that's got, oaks, or drop into a canyon or something, but change what you're doing and just observe the sign, and you'll be able to key in on that way. Because they do, especially in the fall, if there are particular crops that are available that time of year, it's a good year for snowberry or whatever. If you can figure that out, your odds for finding a bear are going to increase quite a bit. Some years we have really good crops in the huckleberry oak, which is a high elevation oak. And when those have good acorns on them, the bears will stay up high. This year there were no acorns. And so those bears, they just left.
One more sort of in the habitat world. Do you guys have any sense of what zones maybe have the most bear density, if you wanted to sort of key on where you might be able to hunt?
I have that right here in front of me. It looks like, so for the 2019 season, about 52% of the bears were taken in the Northern California area. About 723 of them. The Southern Sierra, which is the areas we work in, Stanislaus down to Kern County, they were they took 23% of the bears. So your wetter climate up in the Northern Californias seem to hold a little bit more bears, based on the hunting success at least.
That brings up
Yeah.
another question on my end. Are hunters ever producing a crop that bears move into? Do they ever move into deer hunting areas to take advantage of some of the kills that are left behind with the scraps? Or do they mostly just hear gunfire and smell more people and get out of Dodge?
I wouldn't think that they hone in on it like, the Alaskan grizzlies, where you got a dinner bell ringing when the gunshot goes off. We also don't have areas where there's probably a huge amount of harvest at one time for them to hone in on. The seasons are pretty long here in California, and so other states they may realize that because they only have a week-long season, so there's probably a lot of gut piles, type of thing out there. But California's got one of the longer seasons, so I would think that they would hone in on fawn drop more than hunting. Opportunistic for some protein during fawn drop. I've seen those bears up at elevation in summertime, and they're probably fawn hunters.
Interesting.
Okay, if people are ready, we got a few more questions that we can talk about. These more, I think, focused on population, although I did have one more question more on behavior. When does the hyperphagia slow down for bears on the west slope of the Sierra and or Mendocino or Trinity B-zone areas? If you have any idea.
Yeah, I don't know that we have an exact idea, but I think they're eating until their food source stops. So it's dictated on the fact that they have food available and that they don't need to be going dormant and going into this hibernation or dormant phase. They're going to load up as long as they can. And then it's just like deer. I think at times, there's some deer that they just scream down the hill as soon as a snowflake hits them, and there's others stay up high, but a lot of times they're moving based on food availability. So I think the bears do the same thing. Their food source disappears, their acorn crop goes away, the berries freeze off, all the grasses are dying, deer are moving down. They're going to eat, and then they're not going to have anything, so that's going to force them into a dormant period.
Great. Couple questions about bears versus sows. Given the healthy bear population, does it matter if hunters target sows, obviously without cubs, because that would not be legal, versus boars? Should we still try to target only boars, or does it matter? And then another question was, is there a best practice to field judge boar versus a sow from a distance?
I don't know, Evan, do you want to take this one? My thought is that the bear population compared to our harvest, the bear population is so high and healthy that harvesting a sow without cubs is not a problem. I just don't think it's impacting the overall population.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I actually teased out that number on the last 2 years. So in 2019, looks like about 524 were female and 796, were males. I know that doesn't reach the full quota, but that's just numbers reported. It may not add to the actual harvest totals. Then in this past year, 375 females and 608 males. Based on the population and the numbers, like Nathan said, being harvested, I don't think that's a problem. What I do think may happen without bear hunting is a higher female take, because with a higher take of female with cubs, because a sow walks out, hunter sees it, they shoot it, and then they don't see the cubs. Whereas if you tree that animal, you get up there and you realize that she may have a cub around. And so you back off that animal and you don't harvest it. So I without scientific research done on it, I believe that more females with cubs are taken due to the lack of dog hunting. But overall, population's probably doing fine. How to judge from a distance? I don't know that I would be that great at it either. It's probably size. I mean, the big, if you have a big mature boar, they're probably going to weigh 100 pounds or more than a sow, a mature sow. So size of the animal, I don't know if they get a blockier look to them or not, but I think it just takes a lot of reps.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the maturity of the animal. We keep talking about deer, but because we work with deer a lot, but you see a young buck, doesn't actually look that different than a doe, right? From his body features. If you're looking at a mature boar, which I've seen some that were just obviously it's a boar. But then you see others, and we see them come through our check stations and stuff, and without actually sexing them, you wouldn't be able to tell in the field necessarily. If it looks like a mature animal and it's in the 150 plus range, I'd call it a shooter. It just depends on what you're after. If you're really looking for a mature one or some with a heavier coat, then maybe you pass. But
we had a couple questions about whether politics aside, given the population and harvest statistics and other scientific metrics, is there any chance that A, does there merit some kind of spring bear season? B, is there a possibility of a second bear tag option for successful hunters? I don't know if that's something you guys can answer, if that's a little more policy level stuff that's not really something that's
if there was a concerted effort of folks trying to push the department into those, or at least asking about those, it might get some attention. But to be honest, I think that the department has been really concerned about losing bear hunting more than expanding it. And so, where our goal right now is to make sure that we maintain our ability to hunt bears and manage them. Could we sustain a small spring bear hunt? I'm sure we probably could. But politically, I think it would be a nightmare because that's got to go through a public comment period. We can't just do it, to go through the commission and all of that. I mean, we would just get, it wouldn't pass.
Yeah, a second bear tag would possibly, but I wouldn't say that a spring season.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and maybe with the not hitting the quota year after year after year, that's the time may come where the groups that lobby for different hunting tag changes, they could make that case that we could offer a second bear tag, and because we're not hitting the quota.
Yeah. One more question on the quota.
Eric, just to pause for a second.
Sure.
We are well over our time, so maybe just do one more question, and we'll kind of wrap it up.
That makes sense. Yeah, that sounds good. So we'll just finish up with this one. Someone wrote, they heard that to sustain a population of bears, it requires the culling of about 10% of the population. If that's true, that would require, I guess we know the numbers are fuzzy, but about 3,000 bears to be harvested. So with the management plan calling for only 1,700 bears to be harvested, does that mean bear population is going to continue to increase from year to year?
Nathan, you can chime in, but I think that the population, so what hunting does is it removes a few individuals out of the population. If you will, with any population of animals, you're going to see an increase and then a crash, and then it's going to be balanced out one way or the other. And so we may see a disease issue coming up or if you have again, with deer, a large number of deer in a small area, they overeat, the habitat. So hunting balances out that equation. A lot of non-hunters don't realize that they go out into the woods and see animals, and it's because, and they're not sick and dying. And you get these concentration of like say urban deer and disease outbreaks. That's the balance of the equation there. And I think what we'll end up seeing if we don't harvest more animals, you'll probably end up seeing something like that, a crash that's Mother Nature's intention. Nathan, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I would just say that that theory is based on carrying capacity. So if you're at your carrying capacity, then yeah, you may need to harvest a certain level of the population to keep it under that so that you don't have a catastrophic crash for some reason. We don't know what our carrying capacity is. And so, and with the landscape changing from fires and things like that on a regular basis, that carrying capacity is changing as well. So my gut feeling says we're probably below our carrying capacity still. So the population could continue to increase for a while, until we hit that point where it's too many bears, not enough food, too many people, all those things kind of come together, and then you either harvest them or they die from some other source.
Yeah, I would think that there'd be a lot more human conflicts before you get to the carrying capacity limit.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll have to pause the other questions, but certainly Nathan and Evan, I'm very appreciative of you guys taking your time out for the evening and joining us and just giving a sense of bears and how to approach it as hunters and even as conservationists too. So thank you very much. Really, really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Yep, thank you.
Thank
Anybody
you,
else
guys.
on the board want to chime in and say anything before we close out?
Just also want to thank Evan and Nathan for sharing so much interesting information, exciting information, giving us some of the science, and to thank you all for being BHA members and tuning into this.
Yeah, same here. Kudos. Thank you guys. Yeah, thank you guys very much. And Matt, Eric, nice job as well. This was fantastic. Thanks everybody for joining. Much appreciated, guys.
Nick, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just echoing the same thing. I mean, just very much appreciate the time, the effort, the insight. I think it's valuable to a lot of people. I learned a lot from this, so thank you very, very much.
Great.
And one last thing, we'll plan to save this talk and put it up online somewhere. Stay tuned to the California chapter's Instagram and for more information on that.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.